"You can't bring that thing in here, sir. We don't take antiques." The young man behind the desk laughed when he said it. Two of his coworkers laughed with him. A customer in the showroom turned his head, smiled, then looked back at the new tractor he was pricing. The dealership was bright. The floor tiles were clean enough to see your reflection in. The smell of new paint sat in the air like a finished thought. Earl Whitaker stood in the doorway with his cap in his hand. Outside in the lot, a 1978 John Deere 4440 idled quietly. He had driven it the 11 miles into town that morning, 15 miles per hour the whole way. He was 71 years old. He didn't say anything for a long moment. He looked at the young man. Then he looked at the keys in his own hand. Then he set them on the counter, picked them back up, and walked out. The receipt the dealership had printed for him that morning, before the laughter, was still in his shirt pocket. Trade-in valuation, $0. Disposal fee, if he wanted them to scrap it, $400. He drove the 4440 back home, same 15 miles per hour. He didn't tell his wife about the laughter. He told her the trade-in didn't go through. That was all he said about it. That was June 14th, 2010. Earl Whitaker was born in 1939 in Boone County, Iowa. By the time he stood in that dealership doorway, he had been farming the same 240 acres for 41 years. He bought it in 1969 in pieces, the way a man with no money buys land. 40 acres first from a widow named Mrs. Halloran, who let him pay it down over 6 years. 80 acres next in 1974 from a neighbor whose son had moved to Chicago and didn't want any of it. The last 120 came in 1981, after a bad year for everyone except him, because he had saved. He had no inheritance. His father had been a sharecropper in southern Missouri and died at 58 with $1,400 in a checking account and a watch that didn't work. Earl had taken the watch. He still had it. It still didn't work. He had worked other men's fields from the time he was 14. He had missed his sister's wedding because the corn needed cutting. He had missed Christmas in 1976 because a cow was calving and the vet was an hour away. He had missed his own 50th birthday because a storm had come through the night before and there were fences to walk. The land had been earned in pieces of time, year by year, until there was no more of him left over for anything else. His wife Marjorie had taught 3rd grade in town for 34 years. She had married him in 1965 and never once asked him to be a different kind of man. She kept the books. She kept them in pencil, in a green ledger, in handwriting so small and neat it looked typed. She knew the price of every gallon of diesel he had bought since 1972. The 4440 was the 3rd tractor Earl had ever owned. He had bought it new in 1978 for $26,500. He had financed it for 7 years and paid it off in 5. By 2010, it had 11,400 hours on the meter and had never been to a shop for anything Earl could not fix himself with the manual and a weekend. It was, in his view, the finest piece of machinery ever built by human hands. He understood, standing in that dealership, that the young man behind the counter did not see what he saw. That was fine. Earl had stopped expecting people to see things a long time ago. What Earl did not know that June afternoon in 2010 was that the young man's name was Brett Holloway. Brett was 29 years old. He had an MBA from the University of Iowa, finished 2 years earlier. He had been hired by the dealership 8 months prior as the new sales manager, brought in by the regional ownership group to modernize the trade-in pipeline. His bonus structure, written into a contract he had signed in October 2009, paid him an additional 4% on every new tractor sold and an additional 2% on every used trade-in resold above its intake valuation. Trade-ins valued at 0 counted for nothing in his quarterly report. Customers like Earl Whitaker were, in the language of his quarterly review, non-converting foot traffic. Brett had spent, by his own later admission in deposition, somewhere between 2 and 3 minutes with Earl that morning. He had looked at the tractor through the window, he had looked at Earl's clothes, and he had decided. He told the story at a sales meeting the following week. He told it again at a regional dinner in Des Moines that fall. The line he used both times was the same. He said, "The old man wanted to trade in something his grandfather probably bought." Then he laughed. People laughed with him. Earl, of course, heard none of this. He went home that day and did not speak of the dealership again for 7 months. But here is what Earl did do. That same evening, June 14th, 2010, after Marjorie had gone to bed, Earl sat at the kitchen table with a black hardcover notebook he had bought at the drugstore in 1989. The notebook had 200 pages. He had been writing in it off and on for 21 years. It was not a diary, it was a record. He turned to a fresh page. At the top, in pencil, he wrote, June 14th, 2010. JD dealer, Ames Road location. Refused 4440 trade. Manager, young, dark hair, name on tag started with B. 2 co-workers laughed. Underneath, he wrote one more line. They will sell the lot one day. I will be there. Then he closed the notebook and put it back in the drawer of the roll-top desk in the den, where Marjorie's ledgers were also kept. Earl had been keeping that notebook since 1989 for one reason. His father, before he died, had said one thing to him that Earl had never forgotten. His father had said, "Write down what they do, not what they say, what they do. People don't remember what they did, you will." Earl had taken the instructions seriously. The dealership at Ames Road occupied a 4.3-acre lot on the eastern edge of town, directly adjacent to land Earl had owned since 1981. The two properties shared a fence line of approximately 280 yards. Earl had walked that fence line every spring for 29 years. He knew which posts leaned. He knew which sections the dealership's runoff had eroded. In 1994, he had complained in writing to the dealership's previous owner about a diesel spill that had killed a quarter-acre of his alfalfa. The previous owner had paid him $1,800 and apologized in person. The previous owner's name was Hank Jorgensen, and Hank had retired in 2007 and sold the dealership to a regional group called Heartland Ag Holdings. Earl knew all of this because he had written it down. Every interaction, every letter, every spill, every survey discrepancy, every time a delivery truck had cut across the corner of his field instead of using the access road. He had 34 entries about the dealership in the notebook by June of 2010. He had also, in 1991, written down something his neighbor's lawyer had once told him at a Grange meeting. The lawyer had said, "In Iowa, if a commercial property abuts agricultural land for more than 15 consecutive years, and the agricultural owner has documented disputes with the commercial property owner, the agricultural owner has a statutory first offer right if the commercial property is ever sold or subdivided." Most people don't know it. Most lawyers don't either. It's in Chapter 654A. Earl had underlined that entry in 1991. He had underlined it again in 1994 after the diesel spill. He had underlined it a third time in 2010, the night he came home from the dealership. The years between 2010 and 2024 were, in Earl's notebook, the patient years. He recorded them the same way he recorded everything else. Brett Holloway was promoted to general manager of the Ames Road location in 2013. The dealership group expanded to 4 locations by 2016. Brett's name appeared in the local paper twice, once for sponsoring a youth baseball team, once for a feature on young agricultural executives. Earl clipped both articles. He stapled them into the notebook. In 2019, Marjorie was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. She died on November 8, 2020, at the age of 79. Earl wrote her obituary himself. He wrote it in pencil, in the same notebook before he wrote it anywhere else. He kept the green ledger she had used for 55 years on the kitchen table after she was gone. He had never moved it. It was still there. The night Marjorie died, the last thing she said to him was, "Keep writing it down, Earl. Keep the records." He had nodded. He had not been able to speak. In the spring of 2024, Heartland Ag Holdings announced it was consolidating its Iowa operations. 3 of its 4 locations would be sold. The Ames Road dealership was one of them. Earl read the announcement in the Boone County paper on March 4, 2024. He was 85 years old. He had not driven the 4440 in 3 years, but it still ran. He started it that morning, let it idle in the barn for 20 minutes, and shut it off. Then he went into town to see a lawyer. The lawyer's name was Dale Pendergast. He was 47, had practiced agricultural law in Boone County for 22 years, and had never heard of Earl Whitaker. Earl came into his office on a Tuesday morning, sat down across from him, and placed the black notebook on the desk. "I'd like you to take a look at this," Earl said. And then I'd like you to tell me whether Chapter 654A still applies. Dale Pendergast was a careful man. He had seen a lot of farmers walk into his office over the years carrying notebooks and convinced they had a case. Most of the time, they did not. He opened the notebook expecting the usual. He read for 20 minutes without saying anything. Then he looked up. "Mr. Whitaker," he said, "how long have you been keeping this?" "Since 1989. And you have entries on this dealership going back to 1991. The first one is when they paved the access road and didn't tell me. The next is the diesel spill in 1994. There are 67 entries total now." Dale looked back down at the notebook. Then he looked up again. "Do you have the original survey of your property?" "In a tube on the wall in my den, drawn in 1969. "And the records of your formal complaints?" "Carbon copies of every letter. In the roll-top desk. Mrs. Whitaker filed them by year." Dale Pendergast leaned back in his chair. He was quiet for a long moment. "Mr. Whitaker," he said, "I think we need to file a notice of first offer right with Heartland Ag Holdings before they list that property. I think we need to do it this week." "All right," Earl said. He did not smile. He did not move. He simply nodded once and waited for the lawyer to tell him what came next. The notice was filed on March 11th, 2024. It cited Iowa Code Chapter 654A, Sections 3 and 7. It included copies of 18 documented disputes between the Whitaker property and the dealership property dating back to 1991, certified copies of the 1969 boundary survey, and the original 1994 settlement agreement with Hank Jorgensen, which had included a written acknowledgement that the dealership shares a contiguous boundary of agricultural and commercial use, language that activated the statute permanently. Heartland Ag Holdings legal counsel responded within 9 days. Earl was, by statute, entitled to first refusal at the price the property would otherwise be listed for on the open market. That price, as established by an independent appraisal Heartland had already commissioned, was $487,000. The mediation was held on May 21, 2024, in a small conference room at the county courthouse. Not a courtroom. A conference room with a rectangular table, beige walls, and one window that looked out onto the parking lot. The mediator was a retired district judge named Carolyn Vasquez. She had been on the bench for 28 years before retiring in 2019. Brett Holloway was present. He was 43 now. His hair was thinner. He wore a charcoal suit and sat between two attorneys from a Des Moines firm. He did not appear to recognize Earl when Earl walked in. Earl was alone except for Dale Pendergast. Earl wore the same dark suit he had worn to Marjorie's funeral. He carried his cap in his hand. He sat down without speaking. The Heartland attorneys spoke first. They spoke for 31 minutes. They argued that the 1994 settlement language was ambiguous, that the 654A claim was procedurally defective, that the Whitaker complaints did not constitute formal disputes under the statute. They offered a settlement. Earl would withdraw the notice in exchange for $40,000 and a 50-foot easement adjustment along the eastern fence line. Dale Pendergast did not respond immediately. He looked at Earl. Earl shook his head once. Dale Pendergast then placed 3 documents on the table. The 1994 settlement, signed by Hank Jorgensen, with the relevant language highlighted. The 1969 survey, and page 47 of the notebook photocopied. The page from June 14, 2010. Carolyn Vasquez read all 3. She read them slowly. The room was quiet. Brett Holloway looked at the photocopied page and then looked away. She set the documents down. "Counselor," she said to the Heartland lead attorney, "your settlement language in 1994 is not ambiguous. It is direct and binding. The statute applies. Mr. Whitaker has documented standing going back 33 years. He is entitled to purchase the property at the appraised value. The only question is whether your client wishes to proceed to formal hearing, where I will recommend that decision be entered as a matter of law, or whether you wish to settle on terms today." The lead attorney asked for a recess. The recess lasted 14 minutes. When they returned, the terms were Earl's. The full property at $487,000, closing within 60 days. Heartland Ag Holdings would also pay $94,000 in legal costs and a $48,000 penalty under Section 7 of the statute for failing to provide statutory notice when they began marketing the property in February 2024. Brett Holloway did not speak during the entire mediation. As Earl was leaving, Brett said quietly, "Mr. Whitaker, I don't think we've met." Earl stopped in the doorway. He looked at Brett for a moment. He did not seem angry. He did not seem satisfied. He looked at Brett the way a man looks at a fence post he has walked past 10,000 times. "We met," Earl said. "June 14th, 2010. You told me you didn't take antiques." Then he put on his cap and walked out. Earl drove home that afternoon in the pickup he had owned since 2002. He pulled into his driveway at 4:17 p.m. He went inside. He hung his cap on the hook by the door, the same hook Marjorie had nailed up in 1972. He walked to the roll-top desk in the den. He opened the notebook to a blank page. He wrote in pencil, May 21st, 2024. Mediation held. Property acquired at appraised value, $487,000. Costs and penalty, $142,000. Underneath he wrote, Marjorie, I kept the records. Then he closed the notebook and put it back in the drawer. He went into the kitchen. He sat down at the table where the green ledger still sat. He picked up the phone and called his daughter Ellen, who lived in Cedar Falls. He told her simply that he had bought the dealership lot. Ellen was quiet for a moment, then she laughed. A soft, surprised laugh. The laugh of someone who has just heard something good. Earl heard her laugh on the other end of the line. He sat in his kitchen and listened to it. He didn't say much else. He told her he loved her and he hung up. Then he sat there at the table for a while longer, with the green ledger in front of him and the late afternoon light coming in through the window. And he didn't do anything at all. That was the ending of it. The 4440 is still in the barn. It still runs. Earl hasn't decided what he's going to do with the dealership lot. He has time to decide. He has, by his own count, written 73 entries in the notebook since 1989. And the notebook has 12 blank pages left. Tell me in the comments, would you have walked away with the $40,000 and the easement, or would you have waited 14 years like Earl did? Next time, the story of a widow in Nebraska who got a letter from a wind energy company offering her $12,000 for a permanent easement, and the surveyor who showed up 2 weeks later and found something underneath her south pasture that nobody was supposed to know about. I'll see you there. Paste your script.